every single night, at exactly 3:12 in the morning, my husband would rise from our bed and stand beside me in the dark. He did not touch me. He did not speak. He only watched me breathe. I know how that sounds, but it is the truth, and it went on for 7 long months. My name is Loretta June Carver. I am 90 years old. I was born in 1934, and I have lived long enough to know that when your body wakes you before your mind, it is because something is wrong. That night I learned why. We lived in a small wooden house outside Walterboro in the low country of South Carolina. My husband Calvin was a farmer, and I kept the home. Our 3 daughters, Hannah, Daisy, and Nora, slept down the hall. The house was always quiet at night, except for crickets and the slow ticking of the old clock on the wall. That clock was how I knew the time. 3:12, every time. The first time it happened, I told myself it was nothing. A man gets up to use the outhouse. A floorboard creaks. A shadow moves. You make excuses because you do not want to believe your own fear. But after the 3rd night, and then the 10th, and then the 30th, there was no excuse left. He was standing there, always in the same spot, always when the clock struck 3:12. I stopped sleeping. My hands shook when I poured coffee. My clothes started hanging loose on my body. Hannah watched me with eyes too old for her age. Daisy grew quiet. Nora stayed glued to my side like she could feel the danger in the air. I tried prayer. I tried pretending. I tried telling myself it was nerves. But every night the same ritual returned. I would lie still and feel his presence beside me like a weight on my chest. Some nights I could smell tobacco on his breath. Some nights I could hear his breathing turn uneven, like he was fighting something inside himself. On the night I stopped pretending, I decided I would stay awake and listen. I slowed my breath. I let my hands go limp. I made myself into the best picture of sleep I could manage. I did not know what I would hear, but I knew it would change everything. When he knelt beside the bed and whispered my daughter's name, the truth finally came into the light. Before those nights began, my life was not a happy one, but it was steady. In the 1960s, a woman like me did not expect romance. We expected work and duty, and if we were lucky, a little peace. Calvin and I had been married for 13 years. He rose before sunrise and went to the fields. I cooked, cleaned, mended, and raised our girls. We did not fight. We did not laugh much either. We simply moved through the days, side by side, like 2 people rowing the same boat without ever looking at each other. Hannah was our oldest. She was serious and careful, the kind of child who reminded her sisters to wash their hands and finish their chores. Daisy was the heart of the house. She sang while helping me in the kitchen and talked to the chickens like they were her friends. Nora was small and shy, always hiding behind my skirt, but always watching everything. When I looked at them, I felt rich, even when our cupboards were thin. Our house was simple but clean. A small kitchen, a narrow hall, and 2 bedrooms. At night, the girls whispered to each other and giggled until I told them to sleep. Calvin would smoke his pipe and stare at the wall. That was our life. Not warm, but not cruel. I thought that was just how marriages were. Back then, women were taught to endure. If your husband did not hit you or leave you, that was considered good enough. Nobody asked if you felt safe. Nobody asked if you felt loved. You were expected to be grateful and quiet. I was both. I did not see myself as brave. I did not see myself as trapped. I saw myself as a mother, doing what she had to do. Looking back, I know how small my world had become. The fields, the stove, the schoolhouse and church. That was all I knew. But inside that small world, my girls were everything. That is why what happened later felt like an earthquake. It did not just shake my marriage. It cracked the ground under my children. When fear finally came, it did not knock. It walked straight into my bedroom at 3:12 in the morning and stood beside my bed. The first night it happened, I did not scream. I did not even sit up. I simply opened my eyes and saw a shape standing beside the bed. For one terrible second, I thought someone had broken into the house. My heart jumped so hard it hurt. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it was Calvin. He was standing on my side of the bed, close enough that I could feel his breath. He did not speak. He did not move. He only looked down at me like I was something he was trying to understand. I wanted to ask what he was doing, but fear froze my voice in my throat. After a few long moments, he turned and went back to his side of the bed, as if nothing had happened. In the morning, I told myself it had been a dream. People wake up at night. People stand for a moment when they are half asleep. I needed it to be normal, so I made it normal in my mind. I poured the coffee. I packed the girls' lunches. Calvin ate in silence and went out to the fields. Everything looked the same. But the next night it happened again. And the next. And the next. Always when the clock on the wall said 3:12. always in the same place by my side of the bed. I began to watch the clock at night with a tight chest and shaking hands, waiting for the minute to arrive. That is when I knew it was not a dream. Something had changed inside my house. Something had crossed a line that could not be crossed back. After the first week, my nerves were already worn thin. After the first month, I could no longer pretend I was fine. Sleep became something I feared instead of needed. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until 3:12 arrived. When it did, my whole body would tighten like I was bracing for a blow. During the day, I tried to keep up with my work, but my hands shook. I spilled flour on the floor. I forgot simple things like where I left the scissors or whether I had fed the chickens. I started losing weight without trying. My dresses hung loose on my shoulders and my face looked sharp and tired when I caught it in the mirror. The girls noticed. Hannah began watching me the way children watch adults when they know something is wrong but do not know how to name it. Daisy stopped singing in the kitchen. Nora followed me from room to room as if she was afraid I might disappear if she looked away. In a small town, people talk. I did not dare tell anyone what was happening. A woman saying her husband stood over her bed at night would not be believed. They would say I was nervous or imagining things. So I kept quiet and carried the fear alone. Every night the ritual repeated. The creak of the bed, the soft steps on the floor, the heavy silence when he stood beside me. Some nights I felt his eyes on my face so strongly it was like a touch. I would hold my breath and pray he would go back to bed quickly. 7 months is a long time to live in fear. It changes how you think. It changes how you see the people you love. I started to wonder if I was safe in my own home. I started to wonder what he was waiting for. And worst of all, I started to wonder what he was hiding from me. When fear lasts long enough, your mind starts building stories to survive it. I told myself Calvin might be sick. Maybe his sleep was broken and he did not know what he was doing. Maybe he was half dreaming. I had heard of men who walked at night and remembered nothing in the morning. I prayed more than I ever had. I kept a Bible beside the bed. I whispered verses into the dark when I felt him near. Sometimes that helped me breathe. Sometimes it made the silence feel even heavier. I thought about telling someone, but shame kept me quiet. In those days, a wife was expected to handle her troubles alone. If you complained, people said you were ungrateful. If you spoke too much, they said you were stirring trouble. So I kept my mouth shut and carried the fear inside my chest. But no prayer and no excuse could explain why he came at the same minute every night. 3:12 never changed. That was when I stopped believing I was imagining it and started believing something was very wrong. While I was busy being afraid of my husband, I was missing what was happening to my child. Daisy was the first one to change. She grew quiet at the table. She pushed food around on her plate without eating it. The girl who used to sing while shelling peas now sat in silence with her eyes fixed on nothing. One afternoon, she came home from school and went straight to the bedroom. She said her stomach hurt. When I touched her forehead, it was cool. When I asked what was wrong, she said nothing and turned her face to the wall. Later, I saw that her eyes were red, like she had been crying. Children do not cry for no reason. Fear always finds a way out. I sat beside her on the bed and brushed her hair. She did not pull away, but she did not speak either. Her body was stiff, like she was holding something inside that was too heavy for her to carry alone. In that moment, I felt a cold understanding settle in my bones. Something was wrong that had nothing to do with sickness. Nora stayed glued to my side. Hannah watched both of us with a look that said she knew more than she was saying. My house was full of quiet children and a silent man. And I finally understood that whatever was haunting my nights was also touching my daughters. That was when my fear changed. It was no longer just about me. It was about protecting my girls. Once I realized my children were being touched by the same fear, I could not keep waiting. I needed answers. I needed to hear what Calvin was doing when he stood over me in the dark. I decided I would stop guessing and start listening. That night I went to bed early. I lay on my side the way I always did and practiced slowing my breath. I let my hands rest loose on the sheets. I softened my face and jaw like someone deep in sleep. I told myself that if I could fool him into thinking I was truly asleep, he might reveal what he was hiding. The minutes passed slowly. My heart beat hard in my chest. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady, even though every part of me wanted to look. When the clock reached 3:12, I felt the bed shift as Calvin moved. I stayed still. I felt his steps on the floor. I felt the air change when he stopped beside me. I was close enough to hear his breath. All I had to do was wait. Whatever he was about to say would tell me the truth. He stood there longer than he ever had before. I could feel him watching me, even with my eyes closed. His breathing was rough and uneven, like someone holding back tears. Then I felt him lower himself beside the bed. The floor creaked softly as he knelt. "Loretta," he whispered. My name came out like a prayer. "Please forgive me." My whole body wanted to jump, but I forced myself to stay still. I kept breathing slow and deep the way a sleeping woman would. He leaned closer, and I felt the warmth of his breath on my face. "I was scared," he whispered. I was desperate. I did not know what else to do. His voice shook and then broke. He started crying, the kind of quiet crying that comes from shame. I heard him say the words that made my blood turn cold. "I promised our girl." He said, "Daisy." I felt something inside me crack, but I did not move. "I owed too much," he whispered. $4,200. I lost it all playing cards. The money we saved, everything. Wallace Granger said he would kill me if I did not pay. He said I would disappear. Then he said he would erase the debt if I promised Daisy when she turned 16. I said yes. I said yes to save my life. His words fell like stones into my chest. My child, my baby, sold to a man old enough to be her grandfather. I lay there in the dark, listening to my husband confess to something I could never forgive. Every night he said, "I come here because this is the minute I signed her away. I come to beg you to forgive me because I am too weak to tell you the truth when you are awake." He sobbed quietly beside the bed. I heard him say he hated himself. I heard him say he wished he was dead, but none of that changed what he had done. After a while, he stood up and went back to bed. His breathing slowly evened out. He fell asleep. I stayed awake, staring into the dark, knowing my life and my daughter's lives had just been torn open and nothing would ever be the same again. When the morning came, the house felt different. The same walls, the same table, but the truth was sitting between us like a shadow. I moved through my routine on habit alone. I poured coffee, I buttered biscuits. My hands felt numb. Daisy came into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. When she looked at me, our eyes met, and something passed between us that did not need words. She knew, or at least she knew that I now knew something. I reached out and touched her shoulder. She did not pull away. Calvin came in last. He sat at the table and would not look at me. The man who had stood over me for 7 months could not meet my eyes in the daylight. That told me everything. No one spoke. Even the children were quiet. It was like the whole house was holding its breath. I realized then that fear had been replaced by something stronger. It was clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. I was not going to let my daughter be traded for a man's mistake. I did not know how yet. I did not know what it would cost. But I knew I would not be silent anymore. After the girls left for school, I sat across from Calvin at the kitchen table. The quiet felt heavier than any shouting ever could. I told him to speak. His hands were shaking so hard the cup rattled in its saucer. He told me about the card game in the back of a roadside bar. He told me how he kept losing and borrowing until the debt grew bigger than our land. $4,200 was more than we could earn in years. He said Wallace Granger was known for taking whatever he wanted when men could not pay. I asked him when it happened. I asked him where he signed. I asked him who had witnessed it. I needed every detail because details are how you fight lies. He admitted he had written Daisy's name on a piece of paper and promised her when she turned 16. He said Wallace kept the paper like a receipt. That was when I understood how power really works. It is not about money alone. It is about who holds the proof. I told Calvin a child is not payment. A daughter is not a solution to a man's mistake. He cried and begged, but I was done listening to excuses. What mattered was stopping what he had started. I made him write a statement saying the promise was made under threat and that it was canceled. I did not know if it would work, but I knew I would not walk into a fight empty-handed. By the time he finished writing, my fear had turned into purpose. And purpose is what moves mountains. I read the paper he wrote with care. His handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. It said the promise was made under threat. It said Daisy was free to choose her own future. That piece of paper was small, but it was the first thing that gave me back my breath. I folded it and put it inside my pocket. Then I told Calvin he was not to leave the house. I did not want him warning Wallace or trying to change the story. I wanted the truth to walk into that man's world without being softened. Calvin asked where I was going. I told him I was going to face the person who thought he owned my child. My knees were weak, but my voice was not. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and stepped outside. The air felt different once I made the decision. Fear had kept me trapped. Action set me free. Wallace Granger lived in a big white house behind iron gates. Everything about the place was meant to remind people who held the power. I walked up the gravel drive with my heart pounding but my back straight. When he came to the door, he smiled like a man who thought he had already won. He invited me inside, but I stayed on the porch. I told him I was there to cancel a lie. I handed him the paper Calvin had written. He laughed when he read it. He said it meant nothing because he still had the original promise. I told him a promise made under threat is not a promise. It is a crime. That made his smile fade. He tried to scare me. He said my husband would still have to pay. I told him to collect from the man who gambled, not the child who was innocent. When he stepped closer, I did not move. I told him I would take this story to the sheriff, to the church, and to anyone who would listen. I would tell them a grown man was trying to claim a little girl. In a town like ours, reputation was everything. He knew that. I saw it in his eyes when he realized I was not bluffing. I turned and walked away before he could answer. My legs were shaking, but my heart felt stronger than it had in months. For the first time, I was no longer standing still while someone else decided my family's fate. I did not feel brave when I left his house. I felt empty and tired. My legs ached as I walked down the long road back toward home. The sun was hot on my back and sweat ran down my neck, but I kept moving. Halfway there, I sat beneath a tree and cried. I cried for Daisy and the fear she had been living with. I cried for Hannah and Nora, who felt the tension without understanding it. I cried for the woman I had been before all this started. Then I wiped my face and stood up. Somewhere in that walk, I made my choice. I was not going to stay with a man who could trade his child for his own safety. Love does not look like that. Family does not survive on silence. By the time I reached my front door, I was no longer afraid of what would happen next. I was afraid of what would happen if I stayed. When I got back, Calvin was still sitting where I had left him. I did not argue. I went to the bedroom and packed what I could carry. A few dresses, the girls' clothes, the little money I had hidden away. It was not much, but it was enough to start. I told him I was leaving. He begged and cried, but I did not stop. I walked to Mr. Pike Harmon's house and asked for a ride to the bus station. He saw my face and did not ask questions. He just turned the key. By morning, I was in my sister Marlene's kitchen with my daughters wrapped around me. For the first time in months, the air felt safe. We were not rich. We were not settled. But we were together, and that was enough. We did not rebuild our lives in a single day. It took years of work and quiet courage. I cleaned houses. I sewed for neighbors. My sister helped when she could. The girls grew up in a place where fear did not wake them in the night. That mattered more than anything else. Daisy learned how to laugh again. Hannah learned she could trust her own instincts. Nora learned that home is not a building, but the people who protect you. I never went back to Calvin. I never heard from Wallace Granger again. Sometimes the greatest victory is not watching someone fall. It is walking away so they cannot reach you anymore. If there is one thing I want you to take from my story, it is this. Silence is not safety. Love does not ask you to sacrifice your children. And when your body tells you something is wrong, you should listen. If this story touched you, leave a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And if you have ever trusted your instinct, even when it was hard, I would love to know your story too.